My name is Arthur Finch, and for most of my 46 years, silence has been my closest friend. Here, inside Finch & Sons booksellers, the only voices that mattered were the ones printed on the page. Then, Mayor Thompson decided my quiet life in Crestwood was a punchline for his re-election campaign. This town needs a fighter, not someone who hides behind a stack of books, he declared on the local news, his voice dripping with condescending charm. The camera cut to his supporters, all laughing. They laughed at me, a man they'd never met. They mistook my shyness for weakness. That was their first and most critical mistake. The quiet man they mocked was about to rewrite their entire story. Mayor Richard Thompson wasn't just a politician, he was Crestwood's reigning celebrity. He had a handshake that felt like a contract, and a smile that could sell swampland in winter. He built his career on foundations of charm and backroom deals, treating our town like his personal kingdom, and its people like pawns. My kingdom was different. Finch & Sons was a sanctuary of worn spines and quiet contemplation. For 20 years I'd sold stories to my neighbors. I knew their hopes, their struggles, their favorite authors. Thompson only knew their votes. The day after his broadcast, Mrs. Gable, a customer I'd known for a decade, slid a book across my counter. "She wouldn't meet my eyes, Arthur," she whispered. What he said, it wasn't right. Her words were kindling. My shyness had always been a fortress, keeping the world out. But Thompson's attack wasn't a siege. It was an invitation to step outside the walls and fight for the home he threatened to corrupt. He wanted a fighter? Fine. He just never imagined his opponent would be me. My shyness wasn't born, it was forged, in the humid, varnish-scented air of the Crestwood Elementary School auditorium. I was 9 years old. My father, Robert Finch, was a man built of handshakes and booming speeches, a two-term councilman who measured a man's worth by the decibels of his voice. He sat in the third row that day, his posture ramrod straight, expecting a performance, a preview of the political air he was so determined to mold. My topic was the Green Mountain Boys. For weeks I'd practiced in my bedroom mirror, my voice steady, my gestures confident. But standing at that heavy oak podium, staring out at a blur of faces, the words turned to sand in my mouth. The silence stretched, becoming a living thing that coiled in my stomach. Then, a single snicker from the back row, sharp and cruel. It was the spark. Another giggle followed. Then a wave of laughter washed over me, drowning out the frantic beating of my own heart. The loudest came from a boy with a slick, practiced smile who already knew how to win over a crowd. A boy named Richie Thompson. I stood there, a 9-year-old statue of pure humiliation, until my teacher gently led me from the stage. My father's disappointment was a quiet, chilling fog that filled our house for days. He didn't yell. That wasn't his way. He just looked at me that night, his expression a mask of weary resignation. "You're too shy to be a politician, Arthur," he said, the words a final judgment. "A man can't build a legacy on silence." He was wrong about the legacy, but he was right about the silence. I ran to it. I built my fortress of books, a quiet kingdom where the words were safely trapped on the page, where they could never betray me again. My father passed away a decade ago, his ambitions for me buried with him. I inherited the bookstore, not his public life. I found a different kind of legacy in the quiet order of the shelves, in the shared stories with my neighbors. I had made my peace, but seeing Thompson on that news broadcast, his face crinkled in that same condescending smirk, it wasn't just a political jab, it was the echo of that auditorium. The same public ridicule, the same dismissal. He was still that boy in the back row, pointing a finger at the quiet kid who froze. He thought he was burying me with the same old shame. He never imagined that after 37 years, the quiet kid was finally ready to find his voice. The first step was the easiest and the loneliest. I walked into the town clerk's office, the little bell over the door announcing my arrival like a starting pistol. The mayoral candidacy forms felt heavier than any book I'd ever held. My signature, usually a quiet, looping script, was jagged, an earthquake on paper. I left not with a sense of triumph, but with the cold, hard reality of what I had just done. I had declared war. A war one couldn't win alone. I needed an ally. Someone who knew the town's pulse. Someone who understood the fight of the small business owner against Thompson's self-serving monolith. My first and only thought was Frank Miller. Frank ran the print shop on Main Street. For 20 years he'd printed my bookmarks, my flyers, my sale signs. We were brothers in the quiet battle for Main Street's soul. I found him smelling of ink and turpentine, a comforting scent of creation. I laid it all out for him, my voice barely a whisper at first, then gaining strength as I spoke of Thompson's neglect, of the property tax hikes that favored developers, of the library's budget being slashed again. I wasn't just angry, I had a plan, ideas I'd collected for years from the hushed conversations over my counter. Frank listened, wiping his hands on a rag. He nodded slowly. Thompson's had it his way for too long, he finally said, a flicker of what I took for solidarity in his eyes. You'll need materials. A message. I can help you with that, Arthur. We'll get you started. Relief washed over me, warm and disarming. I wasn't alone. 2 days later, Frank called. Big meeting, he said, his voice clipped. My office, 8 o'clock tonight. Someone I want you to meet. A potential donor. He could change everything. I arrived at 8 sharp, my notebook filled with policy points. Frank's office was dark, save for a single desk lamp that cast long, distorted shadows. Frank stood by the window, not looking at me. The door swung open behind me. The scent of an expensive cologne filled the small space before the man himself appeared, stepping out of the shadows. It was Richard Thompson. He beamed that predatory, camera-ready smile. Arthur, he said, his voice oozing false camaraderie. Frank here was just telling me about your ambitions. I looked at Frank. His face was a pale, guilty mask. He couldn't meet my gaze. It's just business, Arthur, Frank mumbled, staring at the floor. He's been my biggest client for a decade. He made me an offer. Thompson stepped closer, circling me like a shark. You see, this is how the real world works. It's not about quiet little plans in a dusty bookstore. It's about leverage. Loyalty. He picked up my notebook from the desk, flicking through the pages with a dismissive smirk. Library funding? A downtown revitalization grant? It's cute. He tossed the notebook back on the desk. Stick to selling fairy tales, Arthur. You're not cut out for this. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. And Frank, he said, clapping him on the shoulder, thanks for the heads up. It's always good to know what the competition is thinking. The door clicked shut, leaving me in the suffocating silence with the man I had trusted. The betrayal wasn't a knife in the back. It was a mirror, held up to my face by the two of them, reflecting the naive fool they saw, the quiet man who thought he could play their game. They thought this would break me, send me scurrying back to my fortress of books. But as I stood there, bathed in the sickly yellow light of Frank Miller's betrayal, I didn't feel shame. I felt the cold, clean burn of pure rage. They hadn't just mocked me. They had shown me the enemy. All of them. I didn't move. I let the silence Frank Miller had just sold settle around us, thick and heavy like dust. He was the one who couldn't bear it. He shifted his weight, the floorboards groaning in protest. Arthur, please, he stammered, his voice thin. You have to understand. Thompson's got his hooks in half the businesses on this street. My new digital press. I took out a loan. He co-signed. I finally turned to look at him, but my gaze wasn't on his face. It was on a framed photo on his desk. Frank and his daughter, smiling at the Crestwood Fall Festival last year. I'd sold her a copy of *The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe just last month. He owns you, I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was flat. An observation, a fact, like the date on a calendar. It's not like that, he insisted, desperate. It's just politics. It's business. You printed my bookmarks for 20 years, Frank, I said, my voice still unnervingly quiet. I walked to the desk and picked up my notebook, the one Thompson had mocked. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of my own naive words. Did you ever once read what was on them? I didn't wait for an answer. I left the notebook on his desk, a monument to his treachery. Walking out of the print shop and into the cool Vermont night was like stepping into a different world. The rage was still there, but it wasn't a fire anymore. It had cooled, hardened into something solid and sharp inside my chest. Thompson and Frank thought they had humiliated me again. Another 9-year-old boy frozen on a stage. They were wrong. They hadn't given me shame. They had given me a map. They had shown me the town's hidden architecture, a web of debts, favors, and fear, with Richard Thompson sitting at its center like a bloated spider. He thought his power came from his booming voice and his backroom deals. He was mistaken. His power came from the silence of men like Frank Miller, the silence of people too afraid, too compromised, or too beaten down to speak up. And I, Arthur Finch, was a master of silence. Thompson had made his second critical mistake. His first was underestimating my resolve. His second, far greater, was showing me his entire strategy. He thought he was playing chess, but he had just handed his playbook to a quiet man who had spent a lifetime reading between the lines. He expected me to shout, to fight him on his terms, in the noisy arenas where he always won. I wasn't going to shout, I was going to listen. My campaign began, not with a speech, but with a question, a simple one. I stood behind my counter the next morning, the scent of old paper, a familiar comfort. Mrs. Gable came in for her weekly mystery novel. As I wrapped it in brown paper, I didn't ask for her vote. I asked about her grandson. "He's struggling to find work, Arthur," she said, her voice dropping. "The old mill site. Thompson promised jobs there. A tech park, he called it. Now it's just another luxury condo development going up. No work there for a boy like him." I nodded, my pen scratching in a fresh, black notebook. Not policy points. People. I wrote down Mrs. Gable's grandson and the mill site. That afternoon, Mr. Henderson, the butcher from 2 doors down, came in to complain about a new parking meter installed directly in front of his shop. "Kills my lunchtime business," he grumbled, "but the new steakhouse on Thompson's block? They got a whole valet zone approved in a day." I wrote that down too. For 2 weeks I did this. I didn't campaign, I listened. My shyness, the very thing Thompson mocked, became my secret weapon. People weren't intimidated by me. I wasn't a politician canvassing for votes. I was just Arthur, the quiet bookseller, asking how they were. They talked. And I filled my notebook with the town's silent anxieties. The threads of their stories all led back to the same place. A denied permit for a family diner. A zoning variance granted to a developer who was Thompson's golf partner. A scholarship fund that vanished from the town budget. Each story was a quiet testament to a small injustice. A favor for a friend. A thumb on the scale. Thompson was running a textbook campaign. He held rallies on the town green, his voice booming through loudspeakers, promising progress and prosperity. He cut ribbons. He kissed babies. He was a whirlwind of noise and charisma. I, on the other hand, was a ghost. To him, I had simply vanished after the disastrous meeting with Frank. He probably assumed I'd given up, just like that little boy on the stage. He was looking for me in the spotlight, never thinking to check the shadows. My first move had to be silent, but it had to be sharp. Frank Miller still had my old notebook, the one filled with my naive policy ideas. But I had a new one now, filled with something far more powerful, the truth. I couldn't expose the people who had trusted me. Naming them would put a target on their backs. So I decided not to name them at all. I went to see Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was a retired journalist who'd run the Crestwood Chronicle for 40 years before it was bought out by a media conglomerate and reduced to a leaflet of press releases. She was sharp, forgotten, and nursed a quiet grudge against the new establishment. I found her tending her garden, her hands covered in dirt. I didn't show her my notebook. I just told her the stories. All of them. The baker's oven, the butcher's parking meter, the single mother's lost hours at the diner. I spoke for nearly an hour, my voice steady, fueled by the borrowed anger of my neighbors. She listened without interruption, her eyes narrowed. When I finished, she wiped her hands on her apron. "What do you want from me, Arthur?" "I need to ask some questions," I said, publicly. A week later it appeared. Not in the newspaper, but on its own. A single sheet of paper, printed on an old press Sarah still kept in her garage. It was styled like a page from an old farmer's almanac, simple and unassuming. We called it the Crestwood Ledger. At the top, in clean, bold letters, was a simple heading: "A few questions for the mayor." There were no accusations, no names, just questions. Why did the town grant a commercial zoning variance on River Road in March, against the planning board's recommendation, 2 days after the property owner's company made a $5,000 donation to the mayor's re-election campaign? Could the mayor's office clarify the criteria for the small business improvement grants and explain why 70% of the funds this year went to businesses located in the new development project owned by his brother-in-law? Regarding the mill site project, can the mayor provide the minutes from the town meeting where the initial plan for a mixed-use tech park was changed to a private luxury condominium complex, a change that eliminated over 200 projected local jobs? There were 10 questions in total. Each one was a quiet bombshell, loaded with specifics, dates, locations, amounts, that only a handful of people would fully understand. But everyone would understand the pattern. I didn't distribute them with a bullhorn, we did it quietly. Sarah and I, with a few of her old contacts, slipped them into mailboxes in the dead of night. We left stacks in the coffee shop, the post office, the library. I tucked one into every book I sold that day at Finch & Sons. The effect was immediate. Not a roar, but a murmur. The town started whispering. People would see each other on the street and a look would pass between them. A raised eyebrow. A knowing nod. They didn't have to say anything. The questions were doing the talking for them. For the first time, they knew they weren't alone in their silence. That evening, I was closing up the shop when a car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the dusk. The door opened and Richard Thompson stormed in, the little bell above the door shrieking in protest. He wasn't smiling. He strode to the counter and slapped a copy of the Crestwood Ledger down. His face was flushed, a vein throbbing in his temple. "This is you, isn't it?" he hissed, his voice a low growl. "This little poison pen letter." I didn't flinch. I simply looked at him from across the counter, the same counter, where I'd listened to all the stories he had created. I let the silence hang in the air between us, a heavy, weighted blanket. He needed noise. He thrived in it. The quiet was my territory. Finally, I spoke. My voice was even, calm. "They're just questions, Richard. If you've done nothing wrong, you should have no trouble answering them." He stared at me, his eyes searching for the frightened, stammering man he expected to see. He couldn't find him. He saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen before: fear. He couldn't fight an opponent who refused to raise his voice. He needed a brawl, not a debate. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You think you're clever, Finch? Hiding behind your little bits of paper? This isn't a storybook. There are real-world consequences." He straightened his tie. The practiced politician reasserting control. "You love this little shop so much. Let's see how you run it when it's a pile of rubble." He turned and stormed out, the bell over the door clanging like a final, desperate alarm. The consequences arrived 2 days later, not as rubble, but as paperwork. A man in a crisp town uniform, with a clipboard and an apologetic expression, taped a bright orange notice to my front door. "Structurally unsound," it declared in severe black letters. "Access forbidden by order of the Crestwood Department of Buildings." I knew the inspector. I'd sold his daughter a full set of the Narnia series just last Christmas. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mayor's office fast-tracked it, Arthur," he mumbled, his voice low. "Something about a complaint regarding the foundation. My hands are tied." Thompson hadn't just attacked my campaign, he had attacked my home. my legacy. The fortress I had built against the world was now condemned by it. For a moment, standing on the sidewalk, looking at the orange scar on my door, I felt the old, familiar chill of the auditorium. The 9-year-old boy, frozen and alone. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Mrs. Gable was the first to stop. She stood beside me, her hand hovering near my arm. "This is his doing," she whispered, her voice tight with fury. Then came Mr. Henderson, the butcher, who took one look at the notice and spat on the sidewalk. Soon, a small crowd gathered. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. I saw their stories reflected in their faces. The denied permit, the unfair parking meter, the broken promise. The orange notice on my door wasn't just an attack on me, it was a message to all of them. This is what happens when you question Richard Thompson. My enemy had made his third and final critical mistake. He had taken our quiet, individual grievances and given them a public face. He had turned my little bookstore into a symbol. That evening, Sarah Jenkins found me sitting on a bench across the street, just watching my darkened shop. She handed me a thermos of coffee. "He thinks he's cornered you," she said, her voice like gravel. "But all he's done is show the whole town the snake in their garden." The next day was the annual Founders' Day debate, the biggest political event of the year in Crestwood. It was Thompson's stage, his arena. He expected an empty podium across from him, a silent testament to his victory over the shy bookseller. He expected to stand before the town and deliver the eulogy for my campaign himself. I walked toward the town hall that morning, my suit feeling like a costume. But as I rounded the corner onto Main Street, I stopped. The crowd wasn't at the town hall. It was here, in front of my store. Dozens of people stood on the sidewalk in front of Finch and Sons. They weren't protesting. They weren't chanting. They were just there, standing in silent vigil. Mrs. Gable was in the front row, holding a copy of Asterix To Kill a Mockingbird. Mr. Henderson stood with his arms crossed, his butcher's apron still on. I saw the baker, the librarian, the mechanic from the garage on the edge of town. An army of the overlooked. And then, I saw Frank Miller. He stood at the very back, half hidden by an awning, his face a portrait of regret. He was holding a single, fresh copy of the Crestwood Ledger. He caught my eye and gave a slow, deliberate nod. A black car swept down the street, slowing as it approached. Through the tinted window, I could see Richard Thompson. He was on his way to his debate, to his victory. He looked out at the crowd, a confused frown creasing his brow. He was looking for picket signs, for shouting, for anger. He didn't see any. He just saw his constituents, standing in absolute silence, their backs to him, their eyes fixed on the orange notice taped to my door. He saw them choosing to bear witness to his petty tyranny instead of attending his coronation. His car slowed to a crawl. For a brief, beautiful moment, his polished mask of charisma cracked, revealing the panicked bullying boy underneath. He had built his entire world on noise, and here, in the profound, accusatory silence of Main Street, he was finally, utterly powerless. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stood with my neighbors, letting our silence tell the entire story. Thompson's car finally sped away, its squealing tires the only sound of protest against the quiet dignity of the street. He had lost the election right there, drowned not by a roar of anger, but by the deafening weight of our collective silence. The crowd turned to face me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to retreat. Mrs. Gable placed a hand on my arm. "Go on now, Arthur," she said, her voice firm. "It's time for them to listen to you." I walked the 2 blocks to the town hall. Each step felt different, grounded in a purpose that wasn't just my own. The auditorium was half empty, a hollow echo of the vibrant assembly that had gathered outside my condemned store. Thompson was already on stage, pacing behind his podium, his face a mask of forced confidence. He saw me enter, and his jaw tightened. The silence in the room was no longer his to command. The moderator, a nervous young man from the local radio station, asked a softball question about economic development. Thompson seized it, his voice a cannonade trying to fill the empty seats. He didn't talk about policy, he talked about me. My opponent talks about questions, but he offers no answers, he boomed, pointing a shaking finger. He hides. He hides behind anonymous leaflets, and he hides in a building so weak it's a danger to the public. Is that the leadership Crestwood needs? A man whose own house is crumbling? This town needs a builder, not a bookkeeper cowering in the ruins. A few of his staffers clapped weakly. Then, silence. It was my turn. I walked to the podium. I didn't rush. I looked out, not at the empty seats, but at the faces I did see. The librarian, the mechanic, a few others who had followed me from the store. I let the silence stretch, making it my own. Mayor Thompson is right, I began, my voice clear and steady. It didn't tremble. I have spent much of my life in silence, but in that silence, I learned to listen. And I heard you. I heard about the zoning deals, the broken promises, the favors for friends while your businesses suffered. The mayor hears applause. I hear your anxieties. The foundation of my store was condemned today. But what is truly unsound is a town government built on fear. The foundation of Crestwood isn't brick and mortar, it's the people who were standing on Main Street this morning. It's you. And that foundation will no longer be silent. What's the one you're to label someone put on you that you were most proud to prove wrong?